Mr. President, I yield.
Senator Kaine, before you yield the floor, would you yield for a question?
I would yield for a question to my colleague from New Jersey.
I mean, that was the stunning thing about who are you for? Are you for working Americans? Are you for American families? Or are you for the wealthy of the wealthy? I watched this in a slow motion disaster for our country economically when I was getting lobbied by corporations in the same way that you said. They were saying, we're not globally competitive. We're not globally competitive. And so everybody here, all 100 of us, want American businesses to win. So yes, I think that we should have, my opinion was, yeah, let's make our tax rate globally competitive and get rid of some of these crazy corporate tax loopholes that people use so many companies pay zero taxes. So we could have had a bipartisan conversation that could have reflected our values, lower the overall corporate tax rate, and find a way to get rid of loopholes so corporations don't find ways to exempt themselves from taxes, where the average police officer is paying higher taxes than some of the biggest corporations. And I watched you during that time. This is 8 years ago, and you began to say, let's make sure that this tax plan benefits working Americans. Because when you invest in middle-class Americans, working-class Americans, it is a proven way to grow the economy other than this fallacy of trickle down. And so the stunning thing for me, and this is where I want you to, I think that was one of the most powerful points I heard, was when people were coming to me and saying 28%, 27%, 26%, the biggest corporations were saying it publicly. I was reading in the newspaper. The lowest thing I saw the corporations asking for was 25%. What were those conversations like when you were talking to our colleagues on this side? How do they end up at 21% and then not even support an amendment to bring it back up to what the corporate leaders were asking for to the benefit of working class people? How could that amendment not have passed?
The senators reminded that the questions need to be referred to the chair.
Forgive me, especially who the chair is, I'm afraid. So I direct that question to the chair, to the person here.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'll just direct it, and my answer is going to reveal my naivete. Because my corporate sector in Virginia, and my companies are like everybody's companies, were saying, hey, drop that 35% rate to 28. And I may have had one that said to 25, but they were basically saying if you do it at 28, we're going to be equivalent to other nations. When the bill was put on the table, and remember we got it with handwritten interlineations late in the evening where we didn't even have an ability to even decipher what some of the handwritten interlineations were, but we realized they had dropped it to 21%. I almost thought it was a typo. It was one of these handwritten things. I thought that was a typo because the companies were only asking for 28%. And then I looked further in this massive bill and I realized all the individual tax cuts were tiny, temporary, and expiring rather than big and permanent. And so I went to the colleagues and I said, have I got a great idea for you? You can take all these individual tax cuts if you shave off some of the ones to the most wealthy, and you can make them permanent and still do what the corporations had wanted us to do by having a corporate tax rate equivalent of other nations. I thought I was being helpful. I had a solution to a math problem that I thought they were going to like. Instead, what they said is, no, it's got to be 21%, and these individuals, they're going to be weighted to the wealthy, and they're going to be temporary.
Would the senator yield for one last question? Then I'm going to yield to Senator Lujan for his presentation.
I would be glad to yield.
Senator, I came to the floor, or to the chair, I came to the floor to listen to the good faith arguments of colleagues about the Trump tax cut, and I heard them say it would pay for themselves. This was a mantra I heard over and over again. It will pay for itself. It will pay for itself. But independent folks like the Federal Reserve Board, the Joint Committee on Taxation, found that their corporate tax cuts did not pay for themselves, but they drove our government into a multiple trillion-dollar more of a deficit, and that the benefits, this idea of trickle-down economics, the same groups I just mentioned said that 90% of workers didn't see a dime, when overwhelmingly it expanded corporate wealth and the wealth of the top 1% significantly, and didn't inure to the benefit of the postal worker, the cop, the firefighter, the plumber, the teacher. It is stunning to me that I sat here and listened to folks, But my challenge to you, because you've been sort of a pragmatic, moderate guy for a long time, and we're seeing this coming around the corner. Estimates are now that their new tax plan that they're talking about could cause a deficit to expand again by now over $4 trillion. And so you've been around here longer than I have. When we start running budget deficits that we know factually their last tax plan expanded the deficit in trillions, this one is projected, if they do it again, to the benefit of the top 1%, and again, very few of the benefits to the working Americans. What will that mean for America's fiscal stability going into 10 years from now and 15 years from now? What kind of pressures will that create? And what kind of calls do you have from Republicans about how to fix the problem that their tax plan caused?
I hope we can take this up in the Budget Committee. I have some Budget Committee colleagues who are here on the floor. Senator Whitehouse has been the lead Democrat on the Budget Committee for some time and is now at the helm of another committee. But Senator Merkley, who spoke passionately a couple minutes ago, he is now the lead Dem on the Budget Committee. We need to take up the issue of these tax cuts as proposed and explore what the long-term consequences were. The consequence will be to bust the deficit. The consequence will be to put dollars in the hands of those who don't need them and take dollars out of the hands of those who do when you combine it with the tariff effect. But the consequence will also be significant on the national debt. And as Senator Murphy said during his comments, the national debt gets financed, and it gets financed in ways that ends up coming back, and who pays for it? Everyday folks. So you'll have a compounding effect on everyday folks where they will not get tax relief. They may see their taxes increase. They'll see their prices go up with this tariff blitz, and then they'll end up being saddled with the consequences of debt. We should take the time to do this right. We should take the time to do, again, I use the example of what the Finance Committee did last year on R&D tax credit, child tax credit, and the low-income housing tax credit. Not that that bill was perfect, and not that it included everything that you might want to include, but it's an example of you don't have to jam this through with one party holding the pen and excluding the other party. You can do a tax bill that can get 357 votes in the House of Representatives on something that will be paid for, not increase the deficit, help businesses innovate, help children get a good start in life, and help people afford affordable housing. If you do it the right way, we'll come up with a good plan, and I hope that we will.